All right, so today we're going to start in on our last chapter for the year, which is chapter 11. And we're actually going to split this into two parts. The first part's going to focus a lot on two-dimensional areas, circumferences, perimeters, things like that. And so we start off with some circles, since we just got done with the chapter on that. And so we're going to talk about circumference and arc length, which really just boils down to knowing a couple formulas and being able to apply them. So first of all, with circumference. Circumference is like the perimeter of a circle, so it's the distance around the outside. And so there are two formulas that we can use to calculate circumference, and they both are exactly the same thing. It's just a matter of whether we're talking about the radius or whether we're talking about the diameter that we're using. So as we're looking at these two formulas, basically, if I have the radius, then I'm going to take 2 times pi, and so right here we explain kind of what pi is in case it's a new topic for you. But it's the ratio of the circumference to the diameter. So if I take the circumference of any circle and divide it by the diameter, we always end up with the same exact value, which is what they call pi. And so on your calculators, there's a pi button, or a lot of times people use 3.14 as a kind of an approximation for it. And so when we're setting up these equations, again, whether I have the radius or whether I have the diameter, I have a way to calculate circumference using either of the two formulas here. And so these are just two formulas you're going to have to know, and like I said, to be able to apply them. So if we take a look at some examples here, if we have the circumference, we'll find the circumference if we have a diameter of 12. So that means if I have a circle and the diameter is 12, then if I want the circumference, I'm going to use my formulas from the last slide there, which would be circumference is pi times diameter, which in this case is 12. And so then I can either leave that as 12 pi, which would be the exact answer. So I can write it as 12 pi, which is an answer I could use, or I could type in 12 times pi in my calculator, and we end up with a circumference of about 37.7. And so in some cases, they're going to ask you for an exact answer, which is the 12 pi, or they're going to ask you for a decimal answer, which is most often going to be the case. And so we just plug in our calculator and get the decimal answer. And then I can still work through the other two examples using these formulas again. In the second one, we've got a circle, radius length of 10. And so if I want the circumference, I'm going to use the other formula, so 2 times pi times my radius of 10. And so then if we want the exact answer, 2 times 10 is 20. And so I can write 20 pi, or I can plug that in my calculator, and if I take 20 times pi, I get about 62.8. And so again, they might ask for exact, they might ask for approximate. Either way, both answers mean the same thing. And then on the last one here, again, we have the radius. And so if I'm looking at my radius of 1/2, when I go to plug into my formula, I take 2 times pi times 1/2. And so then if I want the exact answer, 2 times 1/2 is 1, so I get 1 pi. Or if I use that as an approximation, 3.14. So as far as circumference goes, once we have the radius or once we have the diameter, we just plug it into the appropriate formula and we get our answer. Now, a topic that goes right along with circumference here is what's known as arc length. So for arc length, we're looking at a distance around the outside of the circle, so instead of the full distance. So like my circumference in this particular example here would be from A, I travel all the way around the circle back to A. So that's what the entire circumference would give me. But in this case, I don't really want the entire circumference. I want to just walk from point A to point B. So using arc length, and using our formulas for circumference, I can calculate how far it would be. So if I walked from A around the circle to B, I can figure out exactly how far I would go. And so here's the formula that we're going to use here. And so the formula looks a little bit complicated, but really, if we think about what's going on here, this first part is just what portion of the circle we're traveling. So the whole circle is 360 degrees. We're only walking part of that. And so that comes in with that measure of the arc, so how big the arc is in terms of degrees. And so if we remember back to last chapter, in this particular setting, I have a central angle of 75 degrees, which means the arc that it goes with also has to have the same measure of 75 degrees. And then as far as the second part of my formula, all I'm looking at is the circumference of the circle. So I'm taking a portion of the circumference. That's exactly what this statement up here is talking about. And so if I plug things in, as I'm looking at this formula here, if I want the arc length for this picture, my arc measure is 75 over 360 times 2 times pi, and then times my radius, which is 12. And so then from here, I can go ahead and just plug this all in my calculator. So I'm going to take 75 divided by 360 times 2 times pi times 12, and I can just plug that all in. And what I end up with as an arc length is 15.7. And so again, as far as arc length is concerned, it's just a matter of putting the numbers into the equation and then using the calculator to give us a value from there. So there's my arc length for a picture like this. Or they might give you a description of the picture. And so in this case, we have a circle with a diameter of 12. So if I put my diameter in here, so the diameter is 12. And it has a central angle of 18. So somewhere in the picture, it doesn't matter where, but somewhere we have an angle, so coming from the center here, and it's going to have an 18-degree measure. Well, what they want the arc length for that particular arc. So we're looking at this arc length right here. And so if I want the arc length, I'm just going to use AL as an abbreviation. I need the angle measure, which is 18, over 360, times 2 times pi. Now here's the other thing I got to think about. So they gave me the diameter is 12. That means when I made this central angle, I created a radius, which would be 6. And so that's what I'm going to plug into my formula, 2 times pi times 6, my radius. And so now if I put all that into my calculator, I take my 18 divided by 360 times 2 times pi times 6, and I end up with an arc length of about 1.9 if we're rounding to one decimal place. And in this case, I can even go a little bit further because they told me I'm measuring in inches, so my arc length would be 1.9 inches. So on the homework today, all you're going to be doing is using those formulas, plugging in the values, so whether they ask for circumference or arc length, you're just plugging the numbers in, plug it in your calculator, get your resulting answer. So as you're working, if you have questions, make sure you ask in class, or once the answer key becomes available, you can go ahead and access that and get whatever help you need from there.